Okay, Cllr and Barbara, General Manager of Transportation Services. I think a question on everyone's mind is how quickly will people in the city see action?
Well, we're taking this incident very seriously. Road safety is very critical to safe passage for cyclists, pedestrians, motorists, transit users. And so that's why we've embarked on Vision Zero Toronto, which really looks across the city on how we can have a comprehensive strategy. So that's our focus. With what had transpired last week, it's very unsettling. We're feeling very badly for this family, and it's an absolute tragedy. So we have actually had 3 meetings today, one formal meeting just at 1 o'clock today to talk about strategies on how to tackle this issue. Clearly, what we would like to achieve is something quickly, so we will be conducting a review, a safety review. It's already underway, and Barbara can tell you more about that, and then looking to implement something in the very near future.
Does that mean a temporary barrier is going to go up in a week or so? What does that mean?
No, we're actually not looking. We did discuss a temporary measure, an interim measure, but we've decided to go with something more permanent that we can use over the long term. So what we'd like to do is spend this week focusing on a full safety review and then look at implementation after that.
So what kind of time frame are we looking at, Councillor?
Well, this week Barbara has her staff, so staff from road operations, as well as staff from the road safety group, as well as Parks and Recreation, because as you know, Martin Goodman Trail is part and parcel of our Parks and Recreation facilities across the city, all the trail systems. So transportation will work closely with Parks and Recreation, as well with the units of road ops, as well as the unit of the road safety group. So we'll make sure all stakeholders are consulted with, and that will take probably this full week. But I think Barbara's hoping to have this wrapped up by Friday.
And Councillor and Barbara, we know that there's, and you mentioned this before, Councillor, 600 kilometers of trail in the city. How much or many, you know, when we look at these kilometers, what stretches are we looking at in terms of any kind of barriers? How many kilometers? It can't be the whole, you can't put a barrier along the whole, all these trails of 600-kilometer trails.
So 300 of those trails, 300 kilometers of those trails are multi-use trails. And so we're looking at the trails where they are close to fast-moving vehicles. And so Barbara can probably speak to that issue better than I can in more detail, but we're going to prioritize those areas. And the #1 priority will be the Martin Goodman Trail because of what's transpired recently.
Councillor, was it brought up in these meetings at all that Martin Goodman Trail in that stretch doesn't meet the recommended guidelines of the city's mixed trails?
So actually the standards of width and dimension for a multi-use trail and setbacks from a roadway and curb height and all of that are far in excess of standards. The proximity to the roadway certainly makes people feel uncomfortable, and so that's why it's very important that any modifications that we make are going to be useful and helpful, and so that's why we're taking the time that we need this week to ensure that we're doing a thorough review. With regard to the rest of the trail corridor, we are in process of identifying those specific segments that run next to fast-moving roadways, and we will also do a review of those locations as well. That probably will not be completed this week for sure.
What about in the meantime? Anything possibly?
In the meantime, we know that the trail has been open and in place for over 20 years, and we know that in that time an incident of this type has never occurred. We also know that this was a terrible tragedy, and that, as Councillor said, our thoughts are absolutely with the family. We know that this is of great importance and concern, appropriately so, to the whole community, and so we will take action as soon as we have an action that we believe is going to solve the problem.
Councillor mentioned a temporary measure here, said you might have more to say about it. What are we looking at here?
Well, I think that what we know is that there is a standard height curb in this location, so in terms of a typical safety measure that has separation, we know that that's already in place. In terms of, as I mentioned, the distance between moving traffic and where the trail corridor is located and its use, we know that that's already in place. And so any measures that would come out of this safety review would likely be to create a perception of security for those users. And that might be a barrier, it might be signage, it might be any number of other things. And so we will really have much more information about that towards the end of the week. We really want to finish this safety review before we take any action.
I'm sorry, a perception of security, but that doesn't mean it will be safe if it's a sign, for example.
Well, no, I think there's... Yeah, I think there's use of the facility. That is one thing. We know from 20 years of common use that that trail is extremely well utilized by both pedestrians and cyclists. We know that through its length, it takes many different forms. In some cases, it's further away from the road. In other cases, like in this location, it's closer to the road. We also know that over that time, we have not seen any incidences like this one previously. And so there is certainly whatever actions that we're going to take, we want to make sure people who are traveling in this location feel comfortable using the trail in this location.
Barbara, anytime there's a death of a child, people are obviously shaken and they want some sort of immediate reaction. But how do you balance that between doing what is right versus doing what just, something to satisfy the public?
It's a great question, and I think our mission and through Vision Zero is about safety of the traveling public. We know that this facility was constructed according to standard. We know that this facility has been utilized for quite some time. We absolutely want to take action. When there's an incident like this, we absolutely have to do a full and thorough review and take action to make people feel comfortable using this facility again, and so that's what we're in the process of doing.
As part of Vision Zero, which of course the goal is to have zero traffic pedestrian fatalities on our roads, does that mean any time there's something like this, unfortunately, that takes place, there will be a review?
We do a Vision Zero safety review every time we have an incident. We also do a comprehensive review. As you know, there's, I believe, 50 countermeasures in the Vision Zero plan. We've looked at corridors and locations where we know we've had high incidences of crashes previously. We understand that if we do that kind of analysis, we are much more likely to find the underpinnings of what those safety concerns and issues are related to and solve them so that they don't become an issue in the future. And so that kind of comprehensive review and following the data on crash factors is what our standard practice is now under Vision Zero.
Is there nothing that could be done in the meantime? I know you would eventually like to build a more sturdy barrier or something like that. Couldn't you even put up like flexi posts or something on that stretch? There's nothing right now.
I think what you'll find is that there is going to be certainly some concerns about the location after this particular incident has occurred. I think what you might also find, and really why we need to do a specific safety review, is that there is comfort issues with regard to people using the trail in that location. And so we want to make sure that whatever we put out there is going to encourage cyclists to travel at the right speed, that's going to be visible by the drivers in that location. That's why I mentioned signage, because if we need to indicate that it's a little bit of a tighter section and people need to slow down, then we need to indicate that as well. So I think whatever we put out there, as you mentioned, there's always the need to act. The public always wants us to act very, very quickly when these situations happen, and we are certainly acting quickly in terms of our review, but we're not going to make any modifications until we know that they're going to help solve an issue.
So just to be clear, is there a fear that if you put something up right away that it might actually cause crashes? Is that what you're saying?
No, I did not say that, and I think the issue is more that we have a space constraints, and so we have to look very carefully at what the right solution is.
It's actually a very constrained location of the Martin Goodman Trail. It's also one of our most popular trails in Toronto. So this section we want to fully review. The General Manager of Transportation has committed to that review. She said it will be finalized by Friday. We've actually talked about options and opportunities in that area. And one area in my ward where we've had some trouble is the Bayview Bridge just north of Lawrence. And we've put up fencing/barricades there. They've worked very effectively. And so we're looking at that option. We're also looking at flexi posts, but we're not sure that would actually fully deal with the issue. But let me be clear about this. We are dealing with this as a priority, the top priority, and we're dealing with it swiftly. So the review will take place this week by road ops as well as the road safety team with Parks and Recreation in the mix. And then from there, we will wrap that up Friday, and we will be looking at some type of installation and implementation shortly thereafter, and sooner versus later.
What does a review entail? I think people hear it, but what is happening?
So we do an actual review of all the conditions out there. We look at slope, we look at setbacks, we look at past crash incidences, we look at the dimension of the facility. Again, we look at past incidences and what their nature is, and then we identify what potentially was at issue, and then we also identify what could potentially solve the issue.
Councillor, I know you identified this obviously because of what happened last week as a priority. Have you identified, or Director as well, any other sort of dangerous trail spots in the city that are at the top of your list?
I just want to underscore that while this has been a tragic incident, the Martin Goodman Trail is not an unsafe facility. It is a well-utilized facility that's been in place for over 20 years. It's extremely heavily used by cyclists and pedestrians, especially in this location or in addition to this location. And this is the first incident of this kind that we have ever seen here, and it is a very serious incident, and we're taking it very seriously in the diligence and the thoroughness and the speed of our review. But I don't want people to walk away with thinking that we have challenges in safety with our trail network. We're very, very diligent about how we design them for safe use.
Sorry, Barbara, just before we...
That particular part of the trail, the Martin Goodman Trail, is it known for cyclists traveling through it at a very high rate of speed? That's what we're hearing from people that frequent that area.
I don't know the speed, but that's certainly something that we will likely look at as part of our safety review.
Sorry, Barbara, just so we can wrap this up, and can you just go over the timeline again in terms of when you want the review to be wrapped up and when we could see something implemented?
So we want to have the review wrapped up no later than this week. We're also in the process of looking at potential facilities, so that when we land on something, it will, as the councillor said, we won't take a long time to put it out there. And then the next piece of that, which we'll undergo similarly, is identifying the other trail locations where we have a cycling facility that is close to a highly traveled roadway, and starting to look and do that Vision Zero safety review at those locations as well proactively. Okay, thank you.